Hey, what's up, everybody? Back with another episode of Hillsborough and Hunterdon Real, where I get to interview the area's top experts in their, specific fields. So today, I'm lucky enough to have Amy Fiedler with me. Amy and Devin grew up together. They've known each other for 20 some years, maybe 22, 23 years. So it's pretty cool. And it's been cool for me getting to know Amy. So Amy, first of all, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was excited to set this up. So why don't we start out with just kind of telling everybody where you grew up, where you're currently living, um, and then we'll dive into it from there.
Sure. So I grew up in Hunterdon County, Flemington. My family still resides there. Went to kindergarten through 8th grade, East Amwell Township, then Hunterdon Central. That's where I knew Devin from. And these days I live in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, so down by Princeton.
Okay. So kind of tell everybody a brief overview, because we'll get more specific with it in a little bit, but a brief overview of what you do, as far as your coaching. And then I want to dive into how you got into that. So kind of just give us the elevator speech real quick.
Sure. The Cliff Notes. You'd like the Cliff Notes.
Okay. Yeah, we'll go into more details.
So I'm certified as a holistic life coach and a trauma support specialist, as well as a Reiki master practitioner. And the brief kind of version of what I do is I work with individuals who are wanting to improve their communication, their boundaries, and work through any sort of like adverse childhood experiences, childhood trauma, maybe abusive relationships, things like that. So I give them the coping tools to process it healthy in a holistic fashion. So I'm not like diagnosing and handing out medicine. I'm not qualified to do that, but we're factoring in social and environmental factors into their care. And they tend to come to me as an alternative to conventional therapy.
Right on. That's cool.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of questions based on what you just said, but we're going to get to them. But tell us, so you're impacting lives, you're helping these people in a holistic fashion through your coaching, but how did you get into this? What made you want to go down this path?
So when I was a teenager, I don't know around the specific age range I was, but I just remember I had a hard time mentally and emotionally. And I didn't have anybody in my immediate family who was capable of supporting me the way I needed. They were pretty reactive themselves. So when I would turn and try to confide in them or try to talk to them about feeling anxious or depressed, they didn't really know how to handle it because they were kind of taking it personally. Like, what did I do as a mom, or what did I do wrong as a dad to make you feel this way? So I asked to go to therapy at a pretty young age. And unfortunately, that didn't pan out very well for me. I felt like I was treated like a number. They kind of handed me a cookie cutter like workbook and didn't really listen or hear me, was really, keen on diagnosing me and handing me medicine. And so I took medicine for depression, anxiety. I was diagnosed with severe OCD. I had suicidal thoughts. I had all of these things, and I was just leaning on the medicine, but I didn't have any coping tools. So I was still suffering. I feel like I got worse, not better, for a certain amount of time. And then I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is not working for me. So I kind of sought after alternative approaches, more spiritual approaches. And that really got me away from taking medicine and into this realm that I'm in now.
And that was back in high school?
That was bad. It started probably like the beginning of high school. And like I was on medicine throughout high school. And then it was like throughout college is when I went off the medicine and was kind of like seeking other ways to do things. I mean, when you're in college, you're kind of drinking a lot and, redirecting your focus on other things. But as I got older and towards the end of college, that's where I was like, this ain't working for me anymore. I
Yeah.
need something else. And that's where I kind of dove into a more spiritual route.
So I think it's cool. It's fantastic because first of all, at that age, high school and college, the stigma with maybe going to therapy or seeking out help. I know when I started therapy when I was like 25, I was nervous because I thought people were going to think I was crazy if they found out. So I can imagine at that age where you're very influenced by your peers. So I give you a lot of courage with that. And it's neat though how your growth came out of this deficit and now you have this gift to help people. So you talk about you kind of went down the spiritual path to helping yourself. Talk about that. Like, what did you find out with that, and how is that morphed into what you're doing with people now, as far as helping them on the spiritual plane?
Well, so I actually met a spiritual advisor, and she kind of introduced me. I wasn't really religious growing up. Like, we went to church at a young age, and I believed in God, but I had a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of God. And she kind of got me into believing something in something bigger than myself, and that kind of like opened this door up for me to explore other avenues. Like, there's something bigger out there, there's something beyond what my eyes can see. Because I grew up in an environment where, it was very limited thinking, and it was that's all you know, when you're only exposed to like screaming and yelling and all these unhealthy forms of coping. And then you kind of broaden your horizons. You're like, oh, there's other ways to do things. There's other ways to communicate with people. There's other ways to believe and behave. And that really got me looking at more things like self-help books and personal development. And then this was not that long ago. This was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. My mom, who worked at the hospital, was like, do you want to take a Reiki class? I was like, what's Reiki? I don't know what Reiki is. And so we went together and we did Reiki 1 together. And that introduced me to a whole different world, which I was familiar with energy from spiritual advisors, but this really gave me a new understanding. And I just started to understand myself better through this, and couldn't stop. I wouldn't say it was like an addiction, but I was really coming into an understanding of who I am and making sense of my whole life. And then you can't quit from there, because you're like, oh, it's starting to click.
Yeah. Yes, you've been on this path of seeking knowledge, and then you share that with people, which is great because as you know, right, a lot of people don't have that level of self-awareness where they're just
Yeah.
going to find something. Now you tapped into it and you keep going. So the Reiki, so you're a Reiki master now, correct?
Yes.
What about like when you perform Reiki on people, talk about the energy you could feel or not feel. Talk about what you're trying to do. Because I don't think a lot of people realize that they're constantly putting off these energy waves because they can't see them. So talk about that a little bit, Amy.
That's what's crazy about it, is that you can almost see just as much that the eye can see when you're tuned into energy, right? What we see in tangible form, in the form of words and behaviors, they're very easy to kind of label and be like, that's unhealthy, that's healthy. In energy, what I feel vibrations, right? So I'll see colors, like I'll see colors of your aura and things when I'm doing Reiki. So if you're in a Reiki session with me and I'm picking up a disturbance in your physical body or in your aura, I feel that in my hands, because I'm channeling that energy to be able to be sensitive to that. And then what we do is the way I explain this to like clients of mine is, when you have negative thought patterns and behavior patterns and you don't change them, that eventually starts to affect your physical body, and it creates disease or dis-ease, right? And so what I pick up on is that dis-ease in your body, or disease as medical professionals would call it. And then I can remove it, or I can cleanse it, or I can balance it. But then it's on you when you walk away to change those thought patterns and change those behavior patterns so that you're not continuing to recreate that problem. People who have reoccurring pain, it's obvious to somebody like me, like you haven't broken that pattern yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, as you know, and like Devin will always say to me, she can feel. You just walk into a room sometimes and you feel somebody's energy being off, because it's all that's going on up here and in here. It just comes out of you, and because we can't see it, smell it, touch it, we don't acknowledge it half the time.
Yeah, and I think people have been duped into believing the five senses is all there is. When I
Yeah.
think that's just the tip of the iceberg, you know.
Yeah, there's so much. There's so much more. So much.
So much more, which is that's cool because the way you're implementing that to help people and teach people with that. So let's say you do a Reiki session, you feel that the aura or the energy is off, and you can address that within the session. But now, what type of thing might you give somebody to work on after they leave you, so that doesn't keep causing dis-ease and all that?
Well, so that's interesting that you've asked that, because I actually discontinued my Reiki sessions for several years until I could find a way to incorporate giving them coping tools. Because what a lot of people do, and I'm sure you know this and experience it in your work, they kind of want a quick fix sometimes. So they want to come and they're like, ooh, cool, clear my aura. And you're like, there's so much more to that. Like, I'm glad that it's like a cheap thrill, but it's only going to temporarily work. You have to implement something. You actually have to take action. So recently, what I've done is I've incorporated some one-on-one time with me before their actual Reiki session, so that we can talk about their emotional history. We can talk about what's happening in their world currently. And then I can make the connections between their physical pain and their behavior patterns and their thought processes. So then when we go into the Reiki session, now I know exactly what we're working on, and they already have an understanding and they have coping tools. And then we have a follow-up call where I check in and I say, hey, how are those migraines? How's that back pain? Like a recent client came with reoccurring back pain, and within 24 hours, that back pain had subsided, which is great.
Yeah.
But I'd like to know, when I see her again in a week, did it come back? Right? Or did you implement what we talked about?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love one of my favorite books is called The Great Pain Deception, but he addresses some of that. It's really cool that you've tapped into this, this gift. But now let's say, because I know from the gym, right? A lot of people, you say, okay, their back goes out, and it's not because they hurt it tying their shoe, but I won't bring it up to people unless they ask, because a lot of people are closed off to this line of thinking because, no, that'll be a quick fix. So let's say you have a client and you can tell that maybe their energy is off. Do you bring up Reiki to them, or do you wait till they seek it out? Like, hey, tell me about this, because you do other forms of coaching besides, working with Reiki. How do you approach that if somebody, you're getting the feeling that they're closed off to that?
Same way you do. Rule number one, they have to be open and willing. So if they I don't and I think yours is the same way. My sales tactics in my business, I don't approach people. They have to come to me. Because when you're working with mindset, when you're working with emotion, they have to be in a place where they're open and they're willing to even hear or make a change. Yeah. I'm good at sales. I can manipulate like the best of them in my verbiage and sell you on something and make the money, but it's not going to help you in the long run if you're not open and willing to really hear it and make a change. They have to be in that place. So I'm never forcing them. I'm never planting the seed. I'm explaining, I have steps, and it's always educate them, give them awareness so they start to tune into their own self-awareness, give them the coping tools, and then from there it's on them. If they want to continue, if they want more, or they want to just take that and try to do it on their own, fine. They always come back, because once they've got that self-awareness, they're like, now I need to know more, you know?
Yeah. And that's what I call, I've always called coaching with a capital C, because a lot of coaches don't get that. This
Mm.
my way, you can do it. And it, like you said, you had the cookie cutter program that you were put through. And that's what a lot of people do. They don't, but you're waiting to the people, it's like when
Well, yeah, they want,
yeah,
it's the difference between someone who's in this because, yeah, it's a business, but I'm genuinely here to help you versus somebody whose ego is a little bit too much in the way. And they're like, I'm running a business and this is now a machine.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, it actually winds up hurting their business long term if they can, you
It
know,
does. It's not a sustainable process. And I've had so many people just with like, I don't help people with their businesses, but when I'm working with emotion, a lot of people are running a business and that's a topic we talk about. And they've spent thousands of dollars on business coaches. They're like, I've invested 10K. And I'm like, why? Because then they end up broke and stuck because that's not the problem. Isn't I don't know how to make money. The problem is inside.
yeah, it is. It is. It's like a superpower once you realize that.
Oh yeah, it's much more powerful when you're aligned and you're in tune with yourself versus you kind of scrambling on the outside trying to implement like actionable steps and then doing in reverse order. It's never going to pay off that way.
Yeah, yeah. Now you mentioned before you're talking about you help people with communication. So I know, when I do mind map sessions at the gym, a lot of times let's say it's a marriage or whatever,
Yeah.
and just the absence of clear communication. So talk about how you work with people with communication and why that's so important.
Well, so a lot of people grew up similar to me in adverse childhood environments where, their parents maybe just lacked the knowledge or the tools to be able to communicate clearly, honestly, directly, and don't realize that they are kind of abusive in their language, manipulation, threats, punishment. That's not healthy communication. And how that impacts a child and the trajectory of their life is they become codependent, they become people pleasers, they end up in abusive situations because they just repeat what they've been exposed to. So when somebody comes to me, what I'm paying attention to is what patterns are you stuck in now? And then we start there and we kind of go backwards like, okay, you have a pattern of being with, let's say, abusive men. I get a lot of women like that, right? So let's look at your childhood. What was the environment that you were exposed to? How was the communication growing up? Did your parents divorce young, or did they stay together and it was just a highly toxic environment where you didn't feel safe? That's where you learn your tools. And then that's what you practice in your life. You just repeat what you saw until you've had enough of, I always say, you got to be sick of your own shit.
Yeah.
Until you're sick of your own shit, you're going to just keep doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. So we teach them like my focus is always, Kyle, on educating them. This is healthy and this is unhealthy. Because if I'm like, talk like me, that's not helpful. They have to learn what's authentic to them. So let me just educate you on these are healthy behaviors, these are unhealthy behaviors. This is healthy communication, this is unhealthy communication. This is how you set a boundary. This is not setting a boundary. And then they start, applying it into their lives.
So you help them recognize that pattern first, right? That's really step one to break.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about when people come to you? Because I know this is a big fear of people, and let's say they own a business and they got to, they're avoiding conflict, or they don't want to have to let it go, ex-employee. How do you help people with that? Because I find that so many people are petrified of any type of what their brain perceives as confrontation or conflict.
Well, the reason people are scared of conflict is because they don't have the coping tools to navigate what they fear that aftermath is going to be, right? It's why, like in dating scenarios, people ghost people because they're scared they lack the self-esteem, they lack the self-worth to speak up for themselves and say, hey, this is what I need, this is what I want, and here's why. So for me, if you're talking to me, I'm going to tell you, let's work on you really claiming what you need and want first. Because once you're solid and grounded in your needs and wants, communicating it is pretty easy. Because if you challenge me on what I'm saying and I'm confident in it, I'm not really going to feel challenged. I'm going to be able to confidently answer you and explain, here's my decision, here's why, or here's my boundary, here's why. Somebody who's, basing what they're saying off of your reaction, they're going to be insecure in that conversation. So if you're like, hey, I need to let this employee go, but I'm scared because their feelings are going to be hurt, or they're going to do this, or they're going to do that. Now you're too focused on them, not focused enough on what you need and want. And now you're going to wobble in that conversation, and it's probably not going to go well. So you're going to probably want to avoid it.
Sure. So it's about you guiding people where to put their attention.
Yes.
Focus, right?
Yeah.
That's brilliant. I want to switch gears now. You wrote 3 books, right?
Yes.
So what year did you write your first book?
Kyle. I don't know. I think it was
roughly.
2015, I believe.
Okay.
My first book came out.
So, and you've written 3 since 2015.
Yes.
And what's out of those 3 books, what's your favorite one? Like, what's the title?
I like them all for different reasons, but I will say my first one is probably, it's the first one, so it's the most meaningful. The first book is 365 Little Blasts of Love, and it's 365 daily affirmations. The book is bigger than a Stephen King novel. It's like this thick. It's like over 700 pages. And all of my books, I call them more like resources, right? So it's not really a book you read so much as it's a book that you turn to as a guide, as a resource. So the daily affirmations, what I instruct them to do is kind of put your hand on the top of the book and ask for what you need, and then flip to a random page. And every single time, the feedback is always, I got the exact affirmation that I needed that day. And I'm like, magic. The second book is called Ask Yourself. And it's a book of, I think it's 126 questions.
Yeah.
Look, I'm prepared.
Nice. Okay.
And so it's literally just questions to ask yourself and self-reflect on, which is very helpful in getting to know yourself, getting in tune with yourself, and understanding your emotions and your needs and your wants. So that's like a great book to use if you're journaling or, trying to improve and increase your self-awareness. And then the third book is called From Limited to Limitless. And it's not on, those 2 are on Amazon. The third one, it was actually part of an online course that I did. So that comes with the course. And it's my understanding of God and my breakdown of like the universe and all of these kind of religious terms that I think get misconstrued or misunderstood. And again, because that's what happened to me growing up. It was like, oh, you have a problem, pray to this God that's outside of you. And then for me, my mindset was like, oh, I'm not important enough for God to answer my prayer. I'm forgotten. Like, it just stayed in alignment with my negative thinking. So this book really helps people understand like who God really is and what that energy source is really about.
Very cool. That's amazing that you've already written 3, because I think a lot of people go through their life and they have this idea that they want to write a book, but the resistance stops them. So talk about that process of this creative process. So you had the idea up here with all 3 of these books, but it's not as, and that's where most people leave it, like I just said, right? So what was that process like of actually writing the book, finding the time for it, going through the whole process, the emotional energy you had to put into it?
Oh my God. I mean, writing is that creative process is, I always say it's always based on mood. So like, so even when you plan a day to sit down and write, sometimes you wake up that day and you're like, I'm just not feeling it. This Ask Yourself book though, I wrote in 2 hours.
Wow.
When you're in that zone and you just get that inspiration, like once it's prompted inside of me, I can sit down and pump it out really quickly. The first book, the affirmation book, was actually a series of blogs. When I started my business, I had run a clothing company, Winky Boo. Those who are watching may know. And as I was kind of transitioning into this field, I tried to merge the websites into like a lifestyle thing. And I started blogging, and I started blogging an affirmation a day. And basically what I did was I took those affirmations. I had 2 years of affirmations every single day. That's some commitment, man. And handed I have a girl who works for me who also edits my books. And I handed them to her and I said, we need 365, edit them. And that's how, and we Googled our way through the process pretty much, like how to set up the artwork and how to do this and how to do that, and then how to get it on Amazon. It was me, her, and Google, and that's it.
You figured it out.
That's how I run shit around here.
It's great. I mean, I think that's people have to use that as inspiration, because again, there's a lot of people that have great ideas, but they just can't seem to bring them forth,
Yeah. It's that whole, what's that saying where they kind of paralyze themselves because they're like, I don't know the next steps.
Yeah.
Like my mindset is always, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And then I just go and figure it out. My mindset is not, this has to be perfect.
Yeah. And you see that a lot. It's the paralysis by analysis.
That
I was told like everybody's waiting for all the lights to be green. It's like, it's not going to happen. You just got to go.
Yeah.
Go, and then you figure it out. And that's what's super cool about you, is that you do it. You figure it out. You want to get Reiki? Okay. You figure it out as you go. And then you keep finding the right teachers, you implement, and you realize it's a never ending process, and that comes across as genuine though, even just from talking with you. And I think your clients pick up on that.
Yeah.
Okay, she might not have all the answers. That's okay. Nobody does, but she's constantly learning.
Well, so that's the thing though. That's really, I feel like the distinction between somebody who is going to be successful in the long haul, right? Is that we humanize ourselves. And I'll say this to clients of mine who are parents, like this is the most powerful thing you can do as a parent, is don't put yourself on that pedestal and act like you have all the answers. Humanize yourself. Like let your kids know, hey, I don't know. Like if you don't know, tell them you don't know.
Yeah.
They will have so much more respect for you and be so much more inclined to share things and be open with you, versus you kind of like elevating and creating that hierarchy where they're like, oh my God, I'm gonna, let him down, or I'm gonna disappoint him because he knows everything or he's accomplished all these things. Like you have to kind of bring yourself back down to ground level and be like, I'm a screw up too.
Yeah. We're all flawed, and otherwise, like you said, especially with parents, they're going to set themselves up for that fall, which is inevitable if you put yourself on that pedestal.
Well, the irony of it is that, and I'll say this to people often, the more I admit to people how screwed up I am, the more they look at me as perfect.
Yeah.
And I'm like, isn't that funny? I'm just going to keep telling you how fucked up I am. You're going to keep respecting me more.
Well, that's how people bond, right? It's who struggle. If you come across as this perfect person, it's just people can't even relate to that. I always use the analogy like bodybuilding when I was competing. There's a certain line of competition. Once you cross, like when Arnold Schwarzenegger would compete, way back in the 70s, he was relatable because, it was a great physique, but he looked like a statue. The guys now, people can't even relate to. So it turns people off because it's like, all right, this is too far beyond so it's that relatability factor,
Yeah.
really connects with people. So you're an avid student. What is your favorite book besides your own? If I say, okay, Amy, one book, what is it?
I like the Four Agreements.
Full agreement.
So honestly, it's a book that I'll read and reread. And then the other book that I live by and will turn to and recommend to everybody is A Course in Miracles,
Yeah.
which is very deep. So if you buy it, you might want to buy the dumbed down version, because there is a dumbed down. I think it's actually called that, maybe, but it really gives a spiritual understanding of like everything we're talking about, right? Like the universe and energy and the world at large. Like it's like the Bible, but in other terminology. And I find that one so powerful. It's a book I study from. It's a book I always go back to. It's all highlighted and shit like that. So
That's cool. I'll have to talk to you more about that one day. That's a book I've started and stopped and started because, like you said, it's a bear. I mean,
it's a lot. It really is a lot, but I find it to be so powerful and refreshing when I turn back to it, because it really just centers me again when I read what's in there.
Sure. How about 5 years from now? What do you see for your life? Where are you at? What are you doing?
I don't think like that. I'm being straight up though. I can't, like, because I suffered with anxiety for so long, for me to jump too far ahead, I get so overwhelmed and I feel so much chaos. But in terms of like end goals for myself, like things that I desire to have, like I desire to get married and have children and have a family of my own. In terms of business and work, my goal, at least from where I'm sitting right now, because it always changes, and I'm sure yours do too. Mine is to just impact and provide the most amount of resources that I can and reach more people, because a lot of people, they say they want help and they can't afford it, or they're not willing to afford it, right? They're not willing to invest. So finding more creative ways to really reach way more people, and children. Like I really want to reach more children. I have parents that are clients of mine, and their example of just talking to me, like their kids come to realize like, oh, she goes to Amy for help. What did you talk about with Amy today? And it starts to impact them and influence them in a positive way. And then the kids want to follow me on Instagram. And I'm like, as long as you don't mind the foul language, let them, because they'll learn,
Right on. How about if you were to go back and give your 20-year-old self some advice, knowing what you know now, what would you tell the 20-year-old Amy?
Oh my God, baby girl, don't endure so much pain. Like, you don't have to, like, I was taught, just deal with it, just deal with it, just deal with it. And you don't have to just deal with certain things sometimes, and there's like to cope with something that's negative or cope with something that's unhealthy for you. All you have to do is communicate on behalf of yourself and set up boundaries. Two very essential things that I never was taught or shown. And like to this day, I'm very open, as you can see, with my story. Even I'm very open with my parents about it, and they both will say, this is all we knew. Like, this is the best and I know that. Like, I don't have any, anger towards you. I did, but now I don't. I understand, like, just like myself, you were hurt children too. And your parents were probably hurt children. So my parents learn a lot from me and what I've gone through. So, you don't have to put up with unhealthy environments and unhealthy people and unhealthy communication. You don't have to deal with it. You can express yourself.
Yeah, and that'll be a great gift to, when you have children one day, to pass that on to them as they mature. And
Yeah.
Very cool. So what is and I'll put all this in the show notes, what's the best way for people to connect with you, to follow you, where do you want them going? Do you want them going to Instagram, to your website, and what are they?
Yeah, so Instagram is my main platform. That's at Amy the Life Coach, just one solid word, Amy the Life Coach. And they can go to my website, which is just amyfiedler.com.
Great. So we'll be putting that in there, and sure people are going to be interested in what you're doing. You know, I could talk to you for hours about all this. I mean, there's so many different, we'll have to do this again because there's so many different roads we could go down
Yeah.
that people will be interested in. But yeah, I appreciate your time. I think people are going to get a lot out of this, and yeah, they definitely will. They definitely will. So let me just bring this to a close here.